bestowed on Gotti by the press and the public. You make the case that guys like Gotti deliberately cultivated the impression that they are Teflon, that they're untouchable. They go out of their way to make everybody think that they have impunity for their actions. And it's part of their con, essentially. It's part of the way they use corruption and intimidation. How does that work exactly, and how do you see Trump doing that as well?
It's sort of an invincibility theater. I am going to very brazenly break the law in broad daylight. I'm going to wear the nicest suits and the most expensive silk ties, and I'm going to walk around and essentially brag that I am above the law. And, you know, I think we see this with respect to President Trump and some of the money grabs that he's making, you know, setting up the $1.7 billion slush fund for his cronies, pardoning the insurrectionists, settling claims with other of his allies, and using the law to go after his enemies. I mean, suggesting that he really is above the law. I also think his name and his face, wherever it goes, has certainly some ego behind it, but I also think it goes to this idea that we see in other authoritarian regimes of the leader is everywhere. Everywhere I look, I see an image of the leader. The leader's image, you know, President Trump's image on the building of the Department of Justice is just a disgusting, vulgar symbol to those of us who've worked there. But I think he is putting his face there to show that he's the boss. He's the chief law enforcement officer. He's in charge. And it creates, I think, a feeling that someone is even more powerful than he really is. Lately, there have been signs around Washington, D.C. I know you've amplified these about, thank you, President Trump, for these public works projects. I don't know who paid for those signs to thank President Trump. Probably President Trump. Yeah. But this idea that he's powerful, he's everywhere, he's omnipresent, creates a feeling that he cannot be defeated. And I think it is designed to intimidate and silence critics. But of course, we have the power to overcome that if we can see through it.
Yeah, it's seeing through it and mocking it. I mean, one of the things that you identify as not just satisfying, but utilitarian is satire, mockery, and comedy, both as something that unifies people, brings people together in a sort of non-political feeling way, but also can be really important in terms of puncturing that kind of theater. Let me ask you about something that's sort of related along these same lines, and it's again another one of these things that I feel like I've written stuff about this. I've read a million academic things about it. I've thought about it in the context of our country, but I feel like you just put it better than I certainly ever have. And that's the issue of oligarchy. So, you know, recently the president just traipsed off to China, brought a bunch of American billionaires on the plane with him. I couldn't believe it when I heard that he actually stopped in Alaska to pick up one of them, to pick up the NVIDIA guy on the way. You know, I just think that you, in this book, in The Fix, you have this really good, succinct explanation of why authoritarians do things like that. Why they make their friends and their family members, but often their friends, into billionaires, and why they take existing billionaires, existing rich and powerful people, and they make sure that they make them richer. And that they, you know, if they're going to rip off the public, they make sure that they're ripping off the public not only for themselves, but also for their billionaire friends. You just articulate really succinctly that the payoff for the leader in doing that is that then these massively rich people who he has helped, they will then use all of their power and all of their resources to prop the leader up and to keep him in power. You know, we've definitely seen it in Russia. We have seen it in Hungary. We are certainly seeing it here in America right now in spades. It just seems very rational to me, right? Like you'd take the person with all the political power and you'd have him essentially leverage for his project all the people with all the other kinds of power too. And if those people are unprincipled enough to go along with it, it just almost feels like an unbreakable system. And so the reason I wanted to ask you about it is given that, what do you think does break a system like that? What is the fix for that?
Yeah, well, I know you wrote about Russian power in Blowout as well. The oligarchs of Russia are an interesting model for all of this, and we've seen the same kind of thing where Vladimir Putin has installed people to lead entire industries. And here we've seen people like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg really kowtow to President Trump in his second term for this vicious cycle. How do we break it? Boy, I think one of the things we really have to get our arms around is campaign finance. I think about the way that Elon Musk is able to essentially buy elections for President Trump. We're seeing now the defeat of some of President Trump's political rivals because they're getting money from some of these billionaire allies who are willing to buy races to primary people who have opposed President Trump, people like Bill Cassidy and Thomas Massie. We saw it with Liz Cheney. And so how do we stop it? I think one of the things is really trying to get money out of politics. There are some ways we can do it, but the Supreme Court has made it very difficult. Yeah. Since the case from the 1970s of Buckley versus Valeo, they've said that money equals speech when it comes to politics. And then, of course, we had the Citizens United case that said, and that right extends to corporations as well. And so we've got all of this big money in politics that makes it very difficult. I'd really love to see the public push back against that in the name of good governance. I think there are things we can do. We are seeing some states already changing the laws of corporations for all of this. And we've seen the same kind of thing where Vladimir Putin has installed people to lead entire industries. And here we've seen people like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg really kowtow to President Trump in his second term for this vicious cycle. How do we break it? Boy, I think one of the things we really have to get our arms around is campaign finance. I think about the way that Elon Musk is able to essentially buy elections for President Trump. We're seeing now the defeat of some of President Trump's political rivals because they're getting money from some of these billionaire allies who are willing to buy races to primary people who have opposed President Trump, people like Bill Cassidy and Thomas Massie. We saw it with Liz Cheney. And so how do we stop it? I think one of the things is really trying to get money out of politics. There are some ways we can do it, but the Supreme Court has made it very difficult. Yeah. Since the case from the 1970s of Buckley versus Valeo, they've said that money equals speech when it comes to politics. And then, of course, we had the Citizens United case that said, and that right extends to corporations as well. And so we've got all of this big money in politics that makes it very difficult. I'd really love to see the public push back against that in the name of good governance. I think there are things we can do. We are seeing some states already changing the laws of corporations to say that corporations cannot make political donations. That's one way, but of course, corporations can always reincorporate in other states that are friendlier to that. But that's, getting citizens involved in taking back some of our power. Jeanne Shaheen, the senator, has proposed a constitutional amendment to undo Citizens United, to say that equality in voting matters more than speech in voting. And of course, we could have a Supreme Court with justices who will overturn Citizens United. In my view, it's wrongly decided, and I think it is one of those kinds of cases that could be overturned in good conscience on the bases that courts use to overturn precedent, and that is the way that money has grown astronomically even in those years since the early 2010s when that case was decided. The other thing we can do is push back. We saw when Elon Musk tried to win through campaigning and funding in Wisconsin a Supreme Court race and failed because voters stood up to that and said no. And so I think although money has a lot of power in politics, if voters get out and vote, there are more of us than there are dollars of them.
Yeah, and with Musk specifically, the Tesla takedown protests, targeting people demonstrating at Tesla dealerships, and really personalizing the issue of what he was doing to the government with Doge and as Trump's top campaign donor being brought in there in the way that he was, that succeeded in forcing Elon Musk out of the government. And it doesn't mean that that stopped the harm that I think he was doing, but it did materially change, I think, the way that otherwise sort of synergistic relationship between him and Trump right at the beginning of this term, it changed the course of that, I believe.
Yeah, political protest is something that some people mock. Some people certainly get concerned if it becomes violent or property is damaged, but peaceful protest is incredibly powerful. I think it is what ultimately drove ICE out of Minneapolis when we saw those protests after the killing of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Those protests were relentless, and they ultimately succeeded. There's an interesting statistic I quote in the book from a researcher and scholar named Erica Chenoweth, who says that if you can get just 3.5% of the population to get out and protest, it can have an incredible effect of taking down a leader. And that is because it is difficult for a leader to have the moral authority when that many people in a country are speaking out. When people are protesting, they are encouraging others on the sidelines maybe to feel empowered, that other people feel the same way that they do. Sometimes people say, you know, the only people in a protest are preaching to the choir. Well, you know, sometimes the choir needs to hear a good sermon too. It can be empowering to realize that there are multiple people, thousands, tens of thousands of people who care about this issue as much as I do. And so never underestimate the power of political protest.
Yeah, I feel like the American people have sort of given us a clinic on that in the past year and a half. Barb, about DOJ, I feel like it's not getting enough attention. That the Trump Justice Department has been just